Hey, I'm Tori Simmons. I am a designer with ServeScape, and I am happy to answer any questions that you guys have for me today. So I went to school for landscape architecture at the CED, and when I graduated, there weren't very many jobs available. So I sort of pivoted in the meantime, and I landed this really great temp job at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, just to sort of fill my time while I applied for other jobs. And it was planting bulbs in the fall around Halloween, and it was thousands of bulbs, and it was the hardest couple of weeks of my life. But I met some really incredible people, some great landscape designers and very talented horticulturists in the Atlanta area, and fell in love with these people and the landscape and the plants and the learning. So I ended up getting a full-time job after the temp job ended, and I stayed for years, and I learned so much about plants and how to plant them and the different types and cultivars and identifying them, and learned a lot about the Latin names of plants and built up this huge Rolodex of plants in my head. And now that I'm older and tired, I get to do some more design work at a desk. So I've kind of translated that horticulture knowledge from the botanical garden to my designs, and I feel like it's made me such a better designer to know all these plants personally, like they're my friends. So I was furloughed from a job when the pandemic started, and was sort of on my own and kind of trying to figure out what I was gonna do, as you know, thousands of people also had to do. And it was sort of very serendipitous situation that Mario just happened to start ServeScape on the same day that they announced the quarantine. And he had a kind of a skeleton crew of people running the website and plant procurement, and he reached out to me not long after as a recommendation from a friend of mine at the Botanical Garden, and he said, "Hey, I need help. I need some design help. How can you help me?" And so I was living in Savannah at the time because of the pandemic, and I packed up myself and my daughter, and we moved back to Atlanta to work for ServeScape. So it's been sort of a whirlwind the last 18 months, but I sort of feel like ServeScape gave me the opportunity to get back on my feet, and I am really grateful for it. And I've learned so much from the team and this little family that we've built from very strange circumstances with COVID, and had to sort of pivot. So yeah, it's been really fun. So I think what excites me about landscape architecture right now is, specifically in the last year with COVID and social distancing, is I think it's allowed designers to be more thoughtful about bringing design closer to home, literally closer to home. I think people have been at home for various reasons, whether they're working from home or they're quarantined, and so people, I think, are wanting to bring these beautiful and resilient landscapes to their door. And whereas they might have driven to go to a park with a lot of people, and during quarantine they couldn't do that, so they're wanting to bring it home with them, and they're making the decision to invest in a landscape that they love and that can be sustainable and grow with their family and meet a lot of those needs that some of the public landscapes, public parks had formerly been fulfilling for them. So I think kind of scaling down these designs and these landscapes to residential, but not your typical just foundation plants sort of residential design, but these tiny little pockets of parks for like a single family. I think I've run into that quite a bit in the last year. So I think that's exciting to make this functional landscape for a unit instead of thousands of people. Has been really interesting and really exciting, and I think that's sort of where ServeScape can come in too. Is we deliver the plants and we bring that literally to your door, and so it's all the scale of design has been kind of smushed into this little package that's been really fun to explore. So the advice that I would give to students of landscape architecture right now is to do your research on what careers are out there. I mean, there are so many paths that you could go that would use and utilize the skills that you've learned that aren't necessarily just sitting at a desk drawing out CAD. There are so many outlets with urban ag and going more of like public gardening and also working for small businesses, like starting up design firms and kind of getting your feet wet that way and working your way up. But I think my advice would be to just explore all of your options. You might not know what your niche is until you kind of work lots of different jobs. And I think we are of the generation where it's more typical to sort of move around and find yourself, as opposed to like my parents' age where you stayed at the same company for 40 years. But I think we have the opportunity to explore and to again sort of blaze our own trail and see what's out there. So that would be my advice, to just shop around. Okay, some underrated plants that I think should be used more often in the landscape are definitely some of our native plants to Georgia. There's so many local growers in the Atlanta area that are really passionate about natives, and I think most people sort of associate native plants with, oh, it's not ornamental, or it's kind of wild and woolly and there's not a lot of structure to it. But I think that is a major misconception. There are some really beautiful plants that are natives. There's fruit producing plants and native grasses with beautiful color and texture and beautiful blooms. And the benefit of using these plants is, all these plants they live here, so they are resilient here, and it minimizes a lot of infrastructure that you might need with a landscape, like irrigation, and they can also solve a lot of problems. Like there's a lot of Georgia natives that help with stormwater mitigation, and they are wetland restoration plants, and there's just so many uses that I think there's so many opportunities to really utilize these plants. So my inspiration for design, I think, comes from really the native landscapes. I have always liked to travel. I did a study abroad in Italy and did a small trip to Scotland and Wales and saw all these beautiful gardens, but also the native landscapes. And I think taking inspiration from nature and how plants are naturally growing and the flora and fauna of that specific region, what makes it so beautiful, what composition makes it so beautiful, and then taking those principles and trying to translate it to a built environment. So, how do these textures work together, and how do the elevation changes work together, and how do we bring in an intentional hardscape that sort of is inspired by this native rock formation. That's where I take inspiration for most of my designs. Well, thanks for having me. It's been really fun answering these questions and thinking things through that maybe I hadn't thought about before. So again, thanks for having me. I'm Tori, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.